The final session of day 1 of the 11th Russian Internet Governance Forum, and this session 2 is called Emerging Technologies, Artificial Intelligence and Ethics. As you must have already gathered from today's presentations and what was said yesterday at the first Youth Russian Internet Governance Forum, it is one of the it's one of the hottest topics these days. And at least yesterday, we received a lot of questions from the audience. Besides, if you look at the paper submitted to the IP and IT competition, you will see there quite an extensive number of works on artificial intelligence. Let me introduce to you the moderators. Thank you very much for agreeing and for coming to the site, because here the quality of the picture is so much better. We can see you directly, and our moderators are Karen Kazaryan from RIGF and Anna Abramova from GIMO. Ilona. And among our participants, we have Elsa Ganeva from Microsoft, Andrei Ignatiev, the Center of Global Cooperation of the MGIMO University. Jan Kleysen is joining us online from the Council of Europe. Sberbank is represented by Andrei Neznamov, MIPT Andrei Kulishov, the Skolkovo Fund, Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology is represented by Andrei Tulpanov. Alexander Tulkanov, that is the Skolkovo Foundation, and Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology is represented by Maxim Fedorov. They were the hosts of yesterday's Youth Forum, and we also have Maxim Korolyuk, the representative of UNESCO, with us. Okay, good luck, moderators. Over to you. Good afternoon. Ethics and artificial intelligence. Today, this is one of the eagerly discussed topics at different sites where the governments, businesses, the academic community meet. Non-discrimination, protecting the rights, reporting and accountability, transparency in decision-making. And we're talking about decisions taken by the AI, are all the various dimensions of these discussions. There are many different points of view. We can't say that much consensus has already been reached, but we are making progress to better access to technologies, inclusivity. Well, in fact, there are more than 100 documents on ethics of different levels originated in the academic community, in the governments and international organizations. They all vary in terms of how detailed they are and which aspects of the problem they highlight. And we need to find an optimal balance now between a system of regulation and sustaining technological progress. In order to find a solution, various initiatives are being discussed, hard regulation and also ethics, to help businesses, governments, and the society to be more confident in handling artificial intelligence. Russia is currently drafting a code, a universal code, with involvement of the various stakeholders, and we believe that this universal code can be the basis for more industry-focused codes. Now let's turn to our experts, and we would like to start with Jan Claesen from the Council of Europe.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Perhaps to start the discussion, a few words about the work of the Council of Europe and artificial intelligence. The Council of Europe, for those who may be less familiar with it, is an organization of 47 European countries, including, of course, the Russian Federation. And it is an organization that is based on the rule of law, human rights, and democracy. And in order to protect these common values, it has established a number of international treaties over the years, starting with the European Convention on Human Rights, but also very much legal instruments, treaties, conventions, as we call them, that deal with new aspects, that deal with technology. The Data Protection Convention, for instance, that was established 40 years ago already. We have the Biomedicine Convention. We have a number of texts that deal with new issues. Of course, the Budapest Convention on cybercrime. So it is not surprising that, given the impact that artificial intelligence and the application of artificial intelligence can have on our core values, human rights, rule of law, and democracy, that the Council of Europe started looking into the possibilities to regulate particular uses of AI, namely where they could put a risk to these values, not only to limit the risk, of course, but also to enhance the opportunities, because it is clear that artificial intelligence does pose risks. It also creates wonderful opportunities. And the current pandemic, which is unfortunately preventing me from being with you in Moscow, as I would have very much liked to be. But you know that France is in a strict lockdown as of this weekend again. The pandemic, for instance, has shown some of the great benefits of artificial intelligence. The development of vaccines and the exchange of information in real time between medical practitioners and researchers all over the world has greatly contributed to enabling the development of vaccines, the improvement of treatment methods that we are having at the moment. To give you just an example, a current example, and we know there are very many others. But we also know that, as any technology, artificial intelligence could also be abused and could also pose risks. This is why the governments of the Council of Europe created a special committee to examine whether it would be possible, like for the issues I mentioned before, whether it would be possible also to have a convention, a treaty on artificial intelligence, or perhaps a series of other soft law instruments, i.e. non-binding instruments. This group, which has the name of KHI was given a 2-year mandate in the end of 2019. And last year, December, it came up with what is called a feasibility study, which is an analysis of what exists as regards legal regulation of artificial intelligence, what is happening in the world, what are the various international organizations doing, what are various countries doing, what exists in the form of ethical charters, and what exists in the form of already existing binding law. And the conclusion which KHI reached was that, yes, there is no legal vacuum. There is already law, both national law and international law, that regulates particular aspects of artificial intelligence, or that at least would be applicable also to artificial intelligence. It was not written for artificial intelligence, but it could be used also as regards the use, the application of artificial intelligence. But importantly, the study also concluded that there are important gaps, specifically because these general rules were not written for artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence creates a lot of new possibilities, but also new dilemmas and new challenges. For instance, in the field of discrimination, there is anti-discrimination legislation in all our countries, but it is based on traditional discrimination before the advent of artificial intelligence. And nowadays, because of the use of AI, new categories can be identified and could be actually the subject of discrimination. To give you an example. Therefore, the study concluded, and I'll try to be brief, that it would be necessary to fill the gaps through a mix of binding and non-binding regulation, binding on a number of overall important principles, and non-binding perhaps on the particular application in certain specific areas. Let me also say the idea is not to regulate absolutely everything. The work of the Council of Europe is to examine AI that has a direct impact, the use of AI that has a direct impact, demonstrable impact on human rights, rule of law, and democracy. Those are the areas we're concerned with. And then, of course, specifically where the use of AI would be a high risk for these values. Following the study, the CAHI, the special committee I mentioned, is now examining the elements, if you're familiar with the Lego game, to examine the Lego blocks, if you like, that could be the basis for either a treaty or a series of recommendations, a mix thereof, and that is the work that is going on at the moment. It is carried out also in a multi-stakeholder way, I'll say by way of a conclusion. Multi-stakeholder way, we have, of course, the 47 member states of the Council of Europe. We also have 5 observer states. We have a number of companies that have signed an agreement with the Council of Europe in exchange of letters and that are participating in our work. And also, of course, civil society is sitting at the table. So the discussion on what could be the elements of future regulation are being discussed as widely as possible. Perhaps I'll put a comma here and wait for your comments and questions. Thank you so much.
Спасибо, Jan.
Yes, thank you very much. We have a question to you directly, Jan, if you don't mind. What is the difference between the European approach and other practices, the American approach, the Chinese approach, with respect to regulating artificial intelligence and ethical aspects of artificial intelligence?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. I think what distinguishes the Council of Europe approach here is that it is that although ethical values, ethical charters, you mentioned them already, the moderators, you mentioned it at the opening of discussion, there are a lot of them. And of course they're important, they give guidance, but they are guidelines. They are non-binding, which means that no government is obliged to adhere to them. It also means that no citizen can actually invoke them before a court or when launching an appeal. They give guidance, important guidance, but they do not give the legal protection to citizens that binding law would have. Secondly, they also do not provide a level playing field for companies. They do not provide legal certainty because, of course, the citizens want to be protected or they want to be reassured that artificial intelligence is not harming them, but is helping them. But companies also would like to know which rules apply when they sell their AI products or their AI services. And of course, they have a great interest in that the rules that apply should ideally be the same everywhere. So that there will not be a patchwork of different legal rules. And the Council of Europe's expertise in the field of human rights, rule of law and democracy makes it a platform of choice to establish exactly such norms on AI that would reassure the citizens that human rights are respected, that rule of law is respected, democracy, of course, but also companies, that the rule of law is respected and that we would have common rules for everyone. And we have demonstrated through a number of our treaties, which have membership that goes far beyond the Council of Europe, that we can set such standards, not only for 47 countries, but for a wider audience.
Благодарю, Ян. Мы хотел бы...
Thank you very much, Jan. We have with us the representative of another international organization, Maxim Korneliuk. He's from UNESCO, and I wanted to ask him a few questions. Maxim works in the section of bioethics and biosciences of UNESCO. So, Maxim, a similar question to you. UNESCO drafts various practical guidelines and recommendations on ethics, bioethics. What is your approach? Yes, thank you very much for the question. Indeed, at the moment, UNESCO is developing recommendations on ethics of artificial intelligence. At the global level, in the system of the United Nations, the mandate on ethics, including ethics of new technologies, rests with UNESCO. UNESCO is the organization for education and culture. That's why back in 2019 we started working on the global recommendations. I'm saying that we are drafting this document, but we have already seen several revisions of the document. We are engaging stakeholders. There were regional and global discussions of this draft document. At the end of the month, we expect negotiations to take place between member states, and they will be discussing this document. Hopefully in November this year, the document will be adopted. It was already mentioned that there are many different principles offered by various international organizations. The question is how to implement them, how to make them applicable. And this is one of our objectives. We want to produce a document that will not only state the principles and ideals, but that will suggest specific steps and tools to promote ethical development and the use of artificial intelligence systems. We are suggesting specific measures in one of priority areas, say healthcare or the labor market, and we are offering mechanisms for implementation of recommendations. For instance, we suggest that an ethical impact assessment be conducted, so that we'll be able to anticipate the implications, ethical implications of an AI development. This mechanism, we believe, will allow the developers of artificial intelligence to align themselves with the fundamental values and principles. So it's important. It's important to produce a practical document, a very down-to-earth document. Right, thank you very much. We wanted to thank the representatives of the international organizations that explained how difficult it is to embed ethics into the modern regulation system. I want to now ask Maxim Fedorov, who represents the Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology, and who is also a member of the expert group on recommendations for artificial intelligence ethics. So in continuation of the previous discussion, in terms of the experts' perspectives, what are the most sensitive points? What are the pain points in the process? Well, I'd say that the biggest pain point is the ontological uncertainty of artificial intelligence. In the UNESCO recommendation, it was decided not to agree a formal definition of artificial intelligence, because the notion, the content of this definition keeps changing all the time. There are more than 100 documents that has been already emphasized, and all of these documents have their own definition of artificial intelligence. One of the biggest tasks that we must address today, also at the international level, is to agree on the terminology. From the point of view of technical experts, artificial intelligence is a stack of technologies, information and communication technologies. Nothing mysterious about it. We understand what's under the hood. This is the so-called weak artificial intelligence, the machine learning algorithms that are called to resolve a specific problem. Although when I'm saying weak, it doesn't mean that they are not powerful. They are quite strong, in fact, and they, even today, as they are, these algorithms can present considerable danger. So yes, those things must be settled somehow. But when we try to regulate something from the ethical point of view, first we need to understand what it is that we are regulating. What do we intend to regulate? And right now, we have ISO, International Standardization Organization, and many matters are being discussed there, including ontology of the field. It's not just the definition of AI to finally settle the matter of what it is and what it is not. We are talking about a whole set of adjacent technologies, like big data, another good case of ontological uncertainty. Probably it's under less light, but the idea is to begin with bringing some order to the ontology. This uncertainty, this cloud of memes around the technology, it creates opportunities for manipulation. All international national agreements on ICTs can be rewritten on the pretext that it's no longer ICT, it's AI. And if we cannot define AI, it means that we can go as far and wide as we like. Another dimension of it is the subject and object of artificial intelligence. Those autonomous intelligent systems, are they subjects or objects of the law? And here the interests of big multinational corporations clash, and it is also a matter of the cultural precepts. In many countries there are different cultural approaches to the subjectness and objectness of entities. It has already been said that the draft document of UNESCO is to be discussed at the end of the month. Our recommendation is to consider AI to be the object of the law, something that is being regulated, something that doesn't have its own subjectivity, subjectness. And yet another aspect is the trustworthy AI, the transparency of AI. Again, it's a whole host of questions, technical and humanitarian in nature. When we talk about trusting a technology, we don't mean just the technical aspects of reliability or predictability of the output. One effect that has been widely discussed today is probably you know about the psychological effect that when robots look too much like people, they are being rejected. That's why in Japan you see many robots produced today which do not look like people at all, although they could be looking like people. It's a matter for psychologists to discuss, of course, but the technology can be safe and secure and can be predictable, but still there are the psychological and social issues that must be somehow discussed, considered, and reviewed, that must be resolved. There is a lot of controversy around those topics. Much work is yet to be done. Our group on artificial intelligence within UNESCO is probably one of the few organizations that is presenting a consolidated position on the international arena on regulation of artificial intelligence. Again, a lot is being done. Most of the work is analytical, that is to say, ideas that were stated in the past are now being analyzed by others. Or another approach is to hold a discussion. The experts come together and they discuss different ideas. But in fact, the scientific approach means experimenting, it means research, it means creating playgrounds where different approaches would be tested, and also the scientific approach means risk projection, risk management. So it's not enough just to analyze ideas, you need to test the ideas. Thank you. Those of you who are watching our broadcast, please send your questions to the chat. At the end of the session, the moderators will select the best questions and put them to our panelists. Now we would like to turn to Andrei Ignatiev. And we would like to ask him a few questions on the Russian Universal Code. I know that there is a slide that we could be showing, or not. Well, I can do without the slide. Well, while we're dealing with this technical issue, a quick note on the site. Among the panelists, we have several people, namely Andrei Ignatiev, Andrei Kuleshov, who, and Maxim Fedorov is also involved, obviously, who was involved in starting this discussion on the ethics of artificial intelligence and codifying the ethics. So where does this idea come from? Is there any difference in the ethics, general ethics and ethics related to artificial intelligence? The idea of producing the code, well, we can't claim the authorship of this idea. The idea was emerging in the society. And also, IEEE accepted a paper that we wrote on codification of ethics. As we were writing the paper, we arrived at the idea that we need to produce some kind of an ontology of ethics as well. And in 1920, we studied all available documents that were written by all kinds of international organizations. By that time, the European Commission, UNESCO, the Council of Europe, OECD. We studied the theories and research that was produced by different businesses, and we realized that in certain respects, there is asymmetry, there is disbalance, or there is no system in understanding the place and the role of ethics in these processes. So we were bold enough to decide that we could produce an approach. Ethics as a science studies morals and social responsibility, but these are the morals, the ideology of a human, of someone who is designing artificial intelligence. That's why our code is aimed at people. Probably this is what makes it different from others. We did not load the code with the transparency of the system or controllability or safety of the systems or robustness of the system. We didn't load the code with features that are associated with the systems. Because it's all these features are actually the product of a human mind. The code, which exists today as a draft, and we are now joined by the AI Alliance, Sberbank, Yandex, those experts. It's still work in progress. It's hard to say where this document will end, but the original group that stood behind the document was supported by MGIMO, by the Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology. It was tested also, peer-reviewed, so to say, by the Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology. This code, as it exists today, it focuses on humans as to the decisions that are taken by the systems. Those decisions and the algorithms, they should be governed by technical regulation and specific practical guidelines, and they must be confirmed scientifically, as Maxim has just explained, which is not easy. We are part of the Committee 42 of the ISO. They are working on 3 documents related to standardization: the document on bias, the technical report on ethics, and they are also drafting a document on trustworthiness, on trust. The standard on trustworthiness is already ready, and the issues related to ethics, integration into the technical system, like matters of justice, for instance, of fairness, they are not very easy even to discuss. The code that we are offering, in addition to being human-focused, it also systematizes somewhat the documents that were produced previously abroad and in Russia. In Russia, in fact, there are many national standards, the GOSTs, that are that are associated with this discussion, like the national standards on data. Our code also offers the terminology, the definitions. We are offering a definition of ethics for AI. The definition is very much based on the definition of Alan Turing Institute. You can see it on the slide now, but it's slightly adapted. And in Russian, it will say, okay, AI ethics is a set of values, principles, and techniques that employ widely accepted standards of right and wrong, and also not just widely accepted standards, but standards in line with the stakeholders' expectations. I will probably stop at this point. Maybe colleagues will add something to what I have already said. Yes, thank you, Andrei. And now I wanted to ask the other Andrei here, why is my question, why does the society, why does the country, why does the business need this code? Well, thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers for convening this conference despite all the obstacles. And I also wanted to say thank you to the colleagues who did a sterling job of drafting the original version of this code. IT people keep asking us, what's wrong? Why are you trying to make our lives harder? Well, we are working on global issues. Why more regulation? Why do you want to control us? Well, there is nothing wrong in what IT people are doing. 100% of professions that take technically difficult, complex decisions in the interests of the public and for the benefit of the people who are not technically competent, all these professions have their codes of ethics. Journalists, lawyers, healthcare providers, they all have codes of ethics. These codes of ethics exist in order to protect the professional who takes the decision on behalf of other people. Therefore, the professionals must be protected and people must be protected in the sense that every taken decision must be easy to understand by those people who can be damaged by those decisions. The decision-making process should be transparent. So when answering the question of why we need a code of ethics, there are certain threats that could be realized through artificial intelligence. These threats must be discussed, but in order to discuss those threats, we must have a language that the professionals and the community, the society will be able to understand. And our code does exactly that. It provides the language. The professional can use that language when talking to the public to explain what is happening and why the actions of the professionals do not damage the interests of the society. In any case, this approach is similar to the experience of other codes of ethics. As step one, we define common values and principles of ethics that could be related to artificial intelligence. Without going into detail, AI is a set of technologies that have certain properties and that could pose certain threats to the public as a function of these features, of these properties. Right now, four main principles lie at the center of this code. Humans first, then risk-oriented approach. Decisions must be taken with due consideration for their implications, the risks that they create. Then there is a principle of precaution. You cannot accept unknown catastrophic risks. Those risks must be prevented. And also the principle of proportionate responsibility or accountability. People who design artificial intelligence must be proportionately responsible for the implications. And out of these four principles, simple rules of behavior can be derived. AI designers, those who implement AI, can always refer to these principles and rules of behavior to understand whether their product will be accepted or not by the public. Thank you. Andrei Neznamov. The Alliance also participated in drafting this document, as Sberbank today has its own rules. Why does business want to be involved in these projects? What is the value of a code of ethics for a company that is developing AI itself? Is it an insurance policy? Is this an insurance policy against excessive regulation? Well, I would say that at the moment, about 36 major AI developers have their own corporate codes of ethics. Russian companies were not among the pioneers. It is China and United States. Both of these countries are leaders in AI, and it's no wonder. So, before adopting our own rules, we talked to some of these companies and we asked them, why do you need your own code of ethics? We heard basically the same answer from all of them. Of course, we had our own idea, but we wanted to test our idea on these companies. The answer that we were receiving from all these leading companies was the following. We want this technology, AI, to be safe, and we want people to trust this technology. There is a big confusion around the word business, because when you were introducing me, you said, now we're going to hear from someone in business. Well, it's like you are opposing the interests of the business and the science and the public at large. In case of AI, there is no opposition. Today, AI is developed by companies, by corporate players around the world. Does it mean that these businesses have some interests, they're pursuing some interests that are contradictory to the interests of the society? Well, yeah, maybe. There are some aspects where you would be able to claim that, but otherwise, we want, as developers of AI, we want people to trust our products, and we want that as much as regulators want it. So having our own principles of ethics is evidence to the fact that the developers want their products to be trusted, that we want there to be rules of the game. And just because there is no government regulation in the field yet, it's not good, it's not bad, it's part of the process, it's part of the way. You cannot adopt a law quickly that will safeguard absolutely everything and guarantee you that AI will be safe and secure. And that's why we keep discussing the principles of AI in the AI Alliance, and together with colleagues, we are developing this universal code, or Russian code, if you will. We do this because we find this important. I don't really like to call this document the old Russian, or you can call it universal. Well, I don't like both names, to tell you the truth. The problem is, ethics is not part of the mindset of Andrei Kuleshov or Andrei Neznamov. Of course, we have our own ideas of what's good and bad, but if we want the whole society to adopt it, then the code should be emanating from the society. How is this possible? As we were talking to international community, we see that neither in the international community nor in particular countries, there is no universal common idea what's good and bad. As I was working in the Council of Europe, we were discussing this with colleagues. Every country has its own position on the recommendations on ethics on UNESCO. The Council of Europe has its own position, and every country in the Council of Europe has its own position. It will be very difficult to make this document to be universally recognized. So my objective is to create a document that would be reasonable and sensible to every person. Probably there is not a single document in human history to which every living person will subscribe, but we want our document to reflect the opinion of the, well, more or less majority. That's why I think that the document should be quite short. It can't be too long. It cannot contain any extreme declarations. It cannot be biased in favor of either or of any of the stakeholders. I'm a lawyer by education. And my tutors used to tell me, if you come to an exam and you don't know the exact answer, think in terms of good and bad, think in terms of sensible, think in terms of reasonable. Try to find your own reasonable solution. Okay, Andrei, then I have another quick question to you. Many of the speakers spoke about things that act as restrictions or limitations, constraints of technologies. Is it possible in the code to mention not only some obligations, not only some restrictions, but also the rights of the developers of artificial intelligence. Well, ethics is different from normative regulation. Ethics cannot be enforced. There is no mechanism of government enforcement in this context, but norms of ethics, they too regulate public relations. And when we say regulate, it means they create both rights and obligations. So this is an answer of a law. You can't have a norm that just sets the obligations. It is important not to start developing a document with a particular aim of either authorizing something or restricting something. In Russia, there is this perception that very often the regulation is all about restriction. Well, in 90% of cases, this is not true. The code of ethics is not about really the rights and obligations. They're about setting rules of game. It's in the eye of the beholder. You see, it can be seen as a restriction, or it can be seen as an opportunity. And I think that the code is about finding the balance between the interests and the opportunities. Maybe we can hear now from Elsa Ganieva. Andrei mentioned international companies that are not only developing artificial intelligence, but that have adopted their codes of ethics. Microsoft is an international company, and you have your rules. How did it affect your operations? Well, thank you, Karen, for the question. To pick up from where Andrei has left, I remember several years ago, these public discussions were centered on just one question. When will humans be replaced by robots? And the lawyers were particularly concerned that robots will replace the lawyers. Today, you hear fewer and fewer discussions of this kind. Today, we are mostly talking how to build our communication with artificial intelligence in the more efficient fashion. And I perceive this discussion today as part of the broader public discussion that contributes to more trust to the technologies. If we don't talk about it, if we do not share these ideas, then of course people will be reluctant to use the technologies if they don't understand how algorithms work, and is it safe to use, is it reliable, how reliable is it? That's why I appreciate this opportunity today as a platform to talk about our ethical principles and what we do to implement these principles in our work. 5 years ago, Microsoft adopted basic ethical principles in the field of artificial intelligence. We know that AI should be fair, the algorithms should be transparent, they should be controllable, they should ensure inclusivity. Anyone should be able to use artificial intelligence products. They are all good things. But the question arises, and we have the question too, but in practical terms, how does it look like? How do we make sure that these words do not remain declarations, and instead how to make our products, how to make our services that we market to be compliant with these principles by default. So in the last 5 years, we produced a system that consists of 3 elements. And the first element is called the management element. In our company, there are several bodies that govern, or how shall I put it, that whole strategic reviews of these principles. We've got a committee for AI ethics. It is a strategic body. It is made up of heads of different departments, and in this committee, the consequences of different decisions with an impact on the economics or social aspects are being considered. Then we also have an Office of Responsible AI. They develop policies and recommendations for the use inside the company. They share cases from our partners. And before launching a new product, we conduct basic impact assessments. And we also have an engineering group that implements all these principles in their work. So that's management or governance. And then we also have the toolbox. Speaking about trust, it's very important that people understand how algorithms work and where a glitch can happen, where an error may be thrown. That's why we have several tools, all of them open source, that enable us to break the algorithm down into several steps to identify the error. It is possible that the algorithm has an erroneous correlation between the color of the skin and gender. It's wrong, but it can be part of the algorithm. We have a tool that can trace that. It's called error analysis. We also have another technical capability that allows us to correlate the algorithm output with the principles of fairness. It's called fair learn. Ernst & Young analysts used this tool when they worked with one of the banks, and they identified that the bank's solution, or decision rather, to originate loans was biased against women. Our algorithm, or rather, not our algorithm, the banking algorithm that scores loan applications is biased in favor of men. The difference was 15%. Our algorithm managed to identify this error, and now the difference between men and women borrowers is less than 0.5%. And we also work with our own staff. Our company employs more than 150,000 people around the world. Not all of them are engineers. And not all of these people are familiar with the AI ethics and the latest trends and regulation. So we organize mandatory trainings, and we also try to engage the members of our team into intellectual workshops or master classes, where our teammates can put on the heads of developers or stakeholders who can be impacted by decisions of artificial intelligence. They are called role games. Like we have this one business game called Judgment Call. So we have several mechanisms in place, and this is how we implement our business principles in practice. And we are very happy to participate in the public discussions. Thank you very much. Alexander Tyrkanov from Skolkovo Foundation. So, Alexander, what is the value of codes of ethics for the development of the industry, and especially for the young companies that have started AI development? Or should they grow up before they start thinking about ethics? Can we have the slides on the screen? Yes, sure. Well, I wanted to go back to what Andrei Kuleshov was saying. I often find myself subscribing to what he's saying. When we talk about AI ethics, what we need to understand is that originally the norms of ethics, of decency, of virtue, they emerged as a part of the evolutionary adaptation of humans. AI is special. It's a technology. And we keep repeating this. At the conferences, we say that today, at the current stage of technological development, today the developers become regulators, be they young companies or old companies, immature or mature, but with their products, with their systems, they are making an impact. Because their systems or algorithms take place of people in the decision-making process. So it's the developer who actually makes possible or impossible a certain kind of behavior or a certain kind of decision. Social norms, legal norms regulate the behavior of in the society post factum, after the act. You could have acted differently to what a norm says, but then you will have to face the penalty, some kind of punishment or expulsion. But in case of code, the regulation is ex ante. It's before the act. That's why it's very important to regulate the behavior of those who are designing those systems. So that the capabilities of technology do not disrupt public good and order. Next slide. And here we go back to the question of why this should be important for business of any size. In fact, the research that we have today shows that a long-term survival of a company is more likely if the company is consistent in its social responsibility and ethics. When it's consistently behaving responsibly, those companies who are abusing the opportunities for the sake of a short-term gain, they lose the momentum quite quickly and they are thrown out of the race. Without much second thoughts. You see what's happening around with the companies that are abusing, say, personal data. The companies are boycotted by the consumers. What you see now on the screen is the quote from a founding father of a company in which I spent some of my career. These words were uttered 100 years ago. These are the words of Werner von Siemens, who said that I do not agree to lose my future in exchange for short-term profit. So ethics in the long run is very profitable. And this is the truth that was known for hundreds of years. We believe that ethics is a good foundation on which to build your business. Well, if a larger business, say, can produce their own recommendations, they can set up special bodies, they can monitor the implementation. If you're a startup, probably you don't have enough resources to even think about ethics. So maybe for smaller companies, for startups, for the companies who don't have many resources, maybe for them the matter of having a very practical and affordable code of ethics is a priority. Well, I guess that this is something that can be achieved with the support of the governments. Maybe they can be getting some support of the governments. And also the support of the community matters. The associations of different companies in AI development can be of help to each other. If you're a startup and if you're part of such an association, you can be, say, relying on support from the government and all of the professional associations. They can help you methodologically. I also wanted to add something. I believe that the universal code can also be such a tool of assistance. We can start with a universal code and then produce sectoral codes. Well, we hope very much that there will be sectoral or industrial codes in the future. But I don't think that the code should be pure soft law. They should be binding, at least to some extent. For instance, adherence to those codes can be made a condition of a company's membership in the association. There should be some kind of responsibility or penalty for non-compliance with the code. Otherwise, it will be empty words. The code will not work. It's sometimes hard to achieve in Russia. We've got practice of the Association of Big Data and the alliance, as far as I understand. Andrei, you are going to have relevant provisions, but enforcement or penalties, they don't seem to work very well. Probably the culture of business here, of business practice, is not very advanced in the country yet. We've only had 30 years of the relatively free market, but even some voluntary commitments and declarations is already a good step forward. It's better than nothing. I can go back to Andrei Kuleshev's words. All professions that carry out some activity that is prone with the risks for others, for other people, all these professions, they adopted their codes of ethics. It's a matter of time. It's inevitable. I received a message from the organizers saying that we do not have any questions from the audience to the panelists. Very well. Then let me use the remaining time to ask the question to the representatives of the international organizations based on what we have already discussed. Jan, if you are still with us. Are you still with us? Mr. Clayson?
Yes, I'm with you, of course.
Jan,
Okay, in your opinion, and thank you for staying with us. We have been talking about some universal virtues or moral principles. So do you think that such a thing as a universal moral exists? Is it possible to develop a universal ethics that would be, I don't know, a document, a code that would be adopted not only by the European countries but by other countries as well. We understand that European countries, they have the same heritage. They come from the same past, but the world is so diverse. Can I add something to this question? Is it possible first to have something common, at least at the level of the European Union or the Council of Europe, and then is it possible to have something even more universal than that?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. Yes, I think it's possible. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. It's not going to be tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. But I think convergence on fundamental principles is possible. Within Europe, the Council of Europe, to take the organization I work with and of which the Russian Federation is, of course, a member, we have demonstrated that it was possible, for instance, on data protection. Already 40 years ago, this year we celebrate 40 years of our Data Protection Convention, to deal with what at the time were emerging new technologies, emerging new ways of dealing with personal data, to find agreement on how to protect those. And this data protection of the Council of Europe, this convention, has now more than 55 states adhering to it, many from outside, of course, Europe, also from the global south. So there is convergence, and the number of ratifications is growing. So yes, it is possible. And it has, you mentioned the European Union, this 40-year-old Data Protection Convention has inspired the European Union in its regulation. So yes, it is possible, I think, to start something at regional level, which then spreads. There are also other examples on technology. A lot of the standards, I know IEEE was mentioned in the debate. We're very pleased at the Council of Europe that IEEE is also a partner in our work and has a seat at the table. But when it comes to common standards on security, they do apply throughout the world. Think of medicine. Medicines are and especially in times of pandemic, of course, this becomes even more relevant. Medicine is being shared all over the world. It is exported, and although sometimes it takes time before everyone approves the same medicine, but there are common international standards. Think about aviation, the safety of our flights. Flights operate across the globe on common standards, common safety protocols, common requirements. And planes are a technology. I mean, air aviation is a technology on which it was possible to reach global standards. Given the impact that artificial intelligence will have increasingly in future, it already has a big impact, it will have an even bigger impact for our children and for our grandchildren. I think it is inevitable that common standards must emerge and will emerge on this. And the work of the Council of Europe, I think, can be a very good basis and will be a very good basis, not only can be, but I'm convinced will be a very good basis to develop these global standards. And in the Council of Europe, of course, we very much take into account the different national experiences. We work on the basis of best practices. So I follow with great interest the discussion. And what is being developed, of course, in the Russian Federation is, of course, very interesting also for the other member states of the Council of Europe. Thank you.
Благодарю, Ян. Максим.
Thank you very much, Jan. Maxim, are you with us? Are you still there? Yes, I'm here. Good. UNESCO is one of the issues on its agenda is bridging the digital divide. When we talk about artificial intelligence, we must remember the impact that it has on the digital divide and the problems of access to technology in the developing countries. Unfortunately, quite often, the voice of those countries is not heard loud enough in the discussions of today. What can we do to change that? Yes, it's a good question. UNESCO adheres to a multicultural and interdisciplinary approach in all its discussions. For us as an international organization, it's very important to collect inputs from all stakeholders, from all countries of the world, to hear all points of view, and to develop, based on these inputs, some common agreements. The AI discussion is already happening at many levels, and the concentration of technology in some countries or in some regions, even in some companies, is excessive. We know that there are about 200 companies around the world that are producing about 80% of all innovations in the field of artificial intelligence. This can lead to further abuse and expanding the digital divide between the countries, which will lead to even a greater economic divide between the countries. We'll take another example. Discrimination against women. We have already heard an example today, and I'd say that women are underrepresented in the field of artificial intelligence. Only 22% of professionals in this industry are women, and in the leading conferences, only 18% of participants are women. Or look at the panel today on the stage. I think that this is quite representative. It's quite visible. And it has a direct impact in the field. It will have a direct impact on what kind of technologies will be produced. It will definitely have an impact on the decisions that the algorithms will be taken. In the fact, I mean, the set of data on which the systems are trained are also dependent on who is collecting those data sets. All these elements must be taken into account. They are essential elements. UNESCO believes that ethics is about decision-making process. Technology must be more affordable in the developing countries. But there should be no forcing. No one should be forced to accept these technologies. In our recommendations, we are saying that ethics is a basis to take decisions on the use or rejecting the use, denying the use of artificial intelligence technologies. This is also an important right, not to use these technologies. Elsa. Yes, I wanted to add a few words. The digital divide is a topic that has been bothering me for a long time. We know that the digital divide existed even before the pandemic. Now, after the pandemic, it has grown wider. In order to close it, I think artificial intelligence can be used. AI has a lot of benefits and usefulness. Speaking of specific examples, and on the topic of gender inequality, in many developing countries, one of the key issues before the countries get the necessary digital infrastructure and before they are connected and before they can start using 5G or even 3 or 4G, before all of this happens, there is another issue that must be addressed, which is non-representative data. In terms of gender inequality, we don't have the data. We don't know what can be done because we don't have the data of what's going on. We need to use the technology to collect statistics. We don't know how many women graduate from higher education facilities. We don't know how many women find employment. And this is where we can employ big data and AI. Connectivity is very important, obviously. Okay, we started receiving questions from the audience. A question to Andrei. Well, it's nice that you mentioned that you wanted to ask Andrei, but we've got 3 Andreis on the panel. Which one? Let me reword the question a little bit. The viewers are asking us, the code of ethics, what kind of status is it going to have? Is it going to be a local regulation, regional, industrial? If you say that the code should originate from the society, don't you think that you should have organized public consultations first, and only after that proceed with discussions inside the academic community? Probably it's a question that any of the 3 Andreis can take, or all of you. I have a quick answer. In some international organizations, including the Council of Europe, interviews or questionnaires were done. The countries received questionnaires on what kind of codes of ethics existed in the countries. Russia didn't have much to report, although in some other countries there are already codes of ethics. It doesn't mean that we are lagging behind or that we are doing something wrong, and maybe we are at the stage of accumulating knowledge on which we will act. But the important thing is not to sit and wait, but do something. It's much better if we have several discussions, several expert sites that produce and share their own ideas, than not to have discussions at all, to have silence. I can't say what will happen to the code. My opinion is the more discussion, the better. The process. Well, when the developers joined this, the process, the process became much livelier. The dialogue between practitioners and theoreticians is very productive. As Elsa was saying, it's not about some robots, some conspiracy, some apocalypse, but really we need to discuss some practical, ethical issues. And we must be making progress towards some codification, some formalization, formalize an official document. Before we have that, there will be just, I don't know, a set of opinions. Ethics is part of philosophy, which doesn't have a set of rules that are set in stone. Ethics is about values, and the source of value, or the sources of value, are varied. There are religious sources of values. There are other sources as well. Values, justice. They're difficult notions. Therefore, we should have a discussion. Okay, since I'm the next Andrei on the line, I guess there is this opinion to which I can subscribe. Potentially, it's not a Terminator who goes outside of the controller that can inflict most of the damage. It's an AI system that is not perfect, or is not perfectly performing the task that it was assigned. It's not. It's or rather. No, I will rephrase that. If the task that is set to the artificial intelligence is wrong, or it's not precise, or it's poorly articulated, but artificial intelligence is very efficient in doing this poorly defined task, this is the worst case scenario. This is where the damage can be maximum. And I think it's the government that can set the rules for those people who take potentially dangerous decisions. Specific rules of behavior can be discussed by the professional community. The professional community of those who are, I don't know, producing AI products for finance or for healthcare or for some other line of work. But some general rules can be set and should be set probably by the state. And that's just my personal opinion. I believe that the government can define some common rules, something that should be part of the code of AI intelligence, and then a sectorial association, an industrial association like a healthcare AI or financial AI will then decide on specific rules for their communities, technical communities. My answer will be brief. The answer to the second question is yes. The second question, the second part of the question was, should we discuss with the community? Should we discuss before we develop? Well, yes, of course we should discuss, but before we discuss something, we need to start with something. You know, when and it's part also of the roadmap. Sorry, that we are. That we've devised from the very beginning. In 2020, we expect several public consultations to take place. In fact, last year at a Sberbank AI conference, we had a special 6-hour session on ethics. We received a lot of feedback from the viewers, from the participants of the session. We incorporated this feedback into our work, and now as we're working on this universal code, we are sharing these insights, these inputs with the Alliance. Another important comment is that the fields where artificial intelligence is very dangerous, critically dangerous, those fields should be regulated by the law. If, for instance, in Russia we already have applicable legislation for AI in healthcare or autonomous vehicles. The Code of Ethics can regulate areas that are not governed by the law, and wherever we say that, or we see that AI can be dangerous, they should be governed by the law. There is a question from the audience to Jan Claesen, and maybe some other panelists would like to answer this question as well, but the question goes to Jan first. Do you think that the wide adoption of AI is slowed down because people distrust biometric identification in Europe, in Germany, in some other countries? How can this distrust be overcome?
Thank you very much. Indeed, a very good question. One of the arguments for regulation is certainly the need to build trust. It is true there is a lot of distrust as regards new technologies. There's also, it depends from country to country, but you will have seen, no doubt, that there is a lot of distrust, for instance, also about vaccines in a number of countries. But there is certainly, I think, widespread distrust of technologies, which is also linked to the fact that a lot of people are not very aware of what is possible. They're not very aware of what their rights are, and they're not being made aware of what their rights are. So the way to make, and I think indeed, I agree with the person who put the question, that this mistrust may slow down the application of artificial intelligence for the benefit of us all, because I said at the beginning of my presentation, artificial intelligence does carry risks, but it also brings great benefits, and therefore proper regulation, understandable regulation, explainable, easily explainable regulation, awareness also, making people aware of what's happening. These are all issues that we, for instance, at the Council of Europe are taking up. The need to explain artificial intelligence, AI, awareness raising, but also literacy, if you like. We speak about, this is the Russian Internet Governance Forum. I'm sure in other panels you will have spoken about digital literacy, people being aware of what can be done digitally and what is happening. And that certainly applies to artificial intelligence. So I think common standards, which would be agreed by 47 countries on what can be done and what can be done and what cannot be done, including, for instance, on facial recognition, and what would be the safeguards and the remedies. If we are able to achieve that, I think that would be a very important step towards building trust, public trust in these technologies, and thereby, through this trust, also enabling them to be used more widely and more to the benefit of our societies.
Спасибо. Кто-то?
Thank you very much. Any other of the panelists would like to take this question? If not, then I have the very last question, and it's an open question. Again, any of you who would like to take it, please do. Can AI be an efficient tool of improving the quality of government governance, national governance? And can AI help fighting corruption? Okay, can I start? Can artificial intelligence be an efficient tool? Of course it can. People can be efficient tools. Can't they? But once again, artificial intelligence, it's part of your question. It's a tool. It's a tool. So yes, AI can be a good and efficient tool in fighting many of the vices of our society. So you should be able to see not only the risks, but also the huge benefit that AI can bring to the society. Oh, I agree. I agree. I would rather rephrase the question. What should be done so that AI becomes an efficient tool in achieving public goals, including fight against corruption? I think that many people here have this experience when you are transferring the money and then the money is stopped. The transfer is stopped because some banking AI identified the transaction as possibly fraudulent. This is something that we should be working on. The more practice you use, the more experience you gain, the higher is the rate of false positives, for instance, or false negatives. So the question is, how can we improve the artificial intelligence systems, and how can we educate the people who use artificial intelligence systems to make them more efficient? A quick comment from me. If I'm not mistaken, in one country, and I will not name that country, there were attempts to use AI in fighting corruption. The machines were asked to identify signs that could speak about a possible implication of a person in a crime. The results were far from good. The machines identified too many people. So yes, at the moment, probably artificial intelligence can be used to fight corruption, but the settings must be very fine, and you must fine-tune your settings. They must be based on experiment. In any case, the machine at the moment can only identify some people, provide some initial information that later will have to be verified through more thorough checks. To answer the question about corruption, how open is the data? So how available is the data based on which some preliminary or screening decisions can be taken? Well, I think our Russian taxation service has access to virtually everything, every single transaction, everything. Well, sometimes you see there are some exceptions to this wonderful rule. Once again, on a more high level, I'm not discussing the algorithm and how precise the algorithm is, but the big question is the availability and accuracy of the data, and in more general terms. And whether AI can be used in the government, well, it is a tool, just like any other tool, it can be used there. But the important thing is that a specific individual is still held accountable for a specific process, because government is a very sensitive sphere. The decisions taken by the government can affect many people and individuals as well. So you can't delegate the decision to artificial intelligence. So even if it's not at the level of a specific transaction, but at the level of the process, there should be some human control. We should know who is responsible with their position, with their, I don't know, money, with their freedom for the decisions taken by the government. I want to use this opportunity, and I will say a few words about the work that we have almost finalized together with RIGF and Sberbank and Baker and McKenzie. We carried out an analysis. We wanted to understand whether we are able to delegate some of the routine decisions to artificial intelligence. We took some routine transactions in retail, in banking, in healthcare, and we also took municipal governance and government services. Based on our research, we can say that definitely, yes, artificial intelligence can be a good aid, and it can be an indispensable technology in the governance of a city, or to automate some processes, like in taxation, or automating some payments, or allowances, or controlling traffic on the roads. So, from this point of view, dealing with some routine tasks can release more of the potential of government services, and it will enable people to focus on more complex tasks and problems. Okay, and this is again where we need to have norms of ethics. Very well, I would like to thank all our participants and panelists. Thank you for being with us, either online or offline. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Out of all I heard today, out of all of the things that I will take away with me, one thing that I can definitely relate to is that ethics is universal. Everybody needs ethics. The governments, the businesses, people, societies, we all need ethics. Thank you very much. We wanted to also thank everyone who sent their questions. And we hope to see you again tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. It's great that we are offline. We have several souvenirs prepared, and we can present these souvenirs to more of the panelists in the second session than we could do during the first session of the day. But while Andrei is distributing the souvenirs, please be back tomorrow at 10 o'clock. There will be 3 sessions. One will be the first one will be on data sovereignty. The other one is digital platforms. And the last session of tomorrow will be more technical. We will be talking about building trust in supply chains. And there will be a special lecture tomorrow. The Coordination Center instituted a special award in 2010, and many of the international and domestic experts received the award. We will find out who is the winner of this year's award. And right after the awards ceremony, there will be a keynote presentation from that winner. Thank you very much, and we'll see you tomorrow at the second day of the 11th Russian Internet Governance Forum. We start at 10 a.m. Moscow time. Thank you.